this point, we had a modification of our original agenda. I'm going to introduce at this time our congressman from this area, Mark Pocan. He had to make a little adjustment in his schedule, so he's speaking now rather than at lunch.
Progressives, and Nate, thank you very much. I have an 86-year-old mother who, I grew up in a lower middle class family. She lives on a $1,140 a month Social Security check. She's gone through most of her savings in the last 20 years, and we are moving her to senior housing next weekend. I have to go today and help start packing, so we had to adjust the calendar a little bit. I really appreciate it, but she's been in the home since 1959. Both of her sons were born in that home, and she's got a lot of memories to go through, but all the more tells us the fight that we have is for people like my mother and all those people across the country who are still struggling to get by. And we have, unfortunately, a state and a federal government that have a very different focus on what should be done. And that's why I'm really glad to be here to talk with you today about some of that work that I know we all have to get done. We know that the Republican Party in Wisconsin is doing the same thing that the Republican Party nationally is doing. They're led by the Tea Party wing of ideas. And the reason I say that very specifically is ideas, because the Tea Party is not a dominant force in nature. It's not a dominant force in the electorate, but they are a very, very dominant force in the ideas that come out of the Republican Party. My pollster, Anna Greenberg, did a presentation last year for the Democratic budget group we have in Congress. And when you look at the Republican Party, the percent that's actually Tea Party within the Republican Party is about 20%. So not counting Democrats, not counting independents, just among Republicans, you're talking about at best a fifth of the Republicans. But they have such a stronger, they double that voting output in those GOP primaries. And because of the gerrymandering we've had across the country, they combined with a few of the evangelicals, and next thing you know, we elect, Glenn Grothman, right? And people like that into Congress and into our state legislatures. And it's that small wing that's really leading the ideas, but what's also that's what the very effects that we're seeing both in Congress and at the state level. If I can just share a story from this week with you from Congress. We were doing our budget work this week. I serve on the budget committee, so last week we actually had a full debate on the Republican version of the budget, although now I refer to it as the Republican/Tea Party version of the budget, because that's where all those ideas have really come. But we even had the Republican Study Committee version of the budget. That's the more extreme wing of the Republican Party. But now there's even a more extreme wing that was recently formed. But just to give you an idea, I think a year ago, that more extreme version of the Republican budget got about 104 votes. This year at 127 votes, I stopped counting. They are definitely a growing influence still within the Republican Party. But what did they have in the mainstream Republican Tea Party budget? Well, they completely repealed the Affordable Care Act. 16 million people who've recently had access to affordable health care would instantly lose that access. They cut back on Pell Grants and funding for our public schools at the K-12 level. They cut back on funding for pre-K, and they cut back on loans and grants at higher educational levels. They cut back on the research dollars that go into making sure that we can cure diseases in the future, NIH funding and other types of funding. They cut back on food stamps. Now, when you start cutting back on things like food stamps, I mean, it used to be the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You got about $31.50 a week when you were getting that assistance. 2 years ago we did this, and I think we're probably going to do it again this year. For a week I lived on that $31.50 along with about 7 other members of Congress to see and show what it was like. I bought a bag of oranges. That was $6 of my $31.50. 20% of my budget went to a bag of oranges. I got a lot of ramen noodle soup, I got a lot of peanut butter, I got a lot of those basics. By the end of the week, I was hungry and out of food. And just the cuts that we had in the last budget has brought that down to now a little over $29 a week. And they want to do even more devastating cuts in that budget. It's not even a realistic budget. They put more funding into defense and less into the programs that hardworking Americans and people aspiring to be in the middle class need to access. And you see the exact same thing right here in Wisconsin. What's Scott Walker's budget do? Well, one, it's really, his campaign plan, right? We all know that for president. But it is cutting $300 million from the public university system. In 2008, when we had the crash, about 49 states were negatively affected, and almost all the states, Wisconsin included, cut back on money that went into the public education system at the higher education levels, and K-12 for that matter. Now, all but about a handful are putting more money back in, and we're at the point of cutting $300 million additional dollars. We're cutting senior care, a program that's wildly popular among seniors to get affordable prescription drugs, another thing that's on that list, and on and on and on. So what we're watching is them doing everything they can to lower taxes for the wealthiest. In fact, in the budget we had, what's great is the big difference between the Paul Ryan budget and the new budget, because we have a new committee chair, is that for 6 pages, all the language around taxes is identical, but they took out 50 words. And those were the words that set the tax rate at 25%. It's still in there. It's 6 pages worth in there. But what they found out is last time, in order to lower that rate to 25%, so that millionaires get a $200,000 tax cut, middle-class families get a $2,000 tax increase. And that's what's in the GOP budget. Again, an economic redistribution, but maybe not in the right direction. These are some of the problems that we face in fighting directly to the Republican Party here in Wisconsin and nationally. But there's also a second thing I think that we face, and we have to be very honest about, is that we have to face not just the left-right fight that we have, but the left-center fight that we have within our own party, within the Democratic Party. And I know not everyone's a Democrat, but for the most part, that's the party we're in, and that's the party that we're talking about when we do this. After the election, we had dismal turnout nationally. In California, New York, some of our biggest states. I remember in California, one of my colleagues and friends, Mark Takano, on election night, he had 45,000 votes. His Republican opponent had 36,000 votes. My Republican opponent that got 31% of the vote got 20,000 more votes than they did combined in California. And when you look at that low turnout, people are like, what happened? What was wrong? And we have a wing of the party that says, you know what? We were too liberal. That was the problem. And that's something we have to fight right now within our own party. We have a presidential primary coming up. We have a state party chair coming up, race in Wisconsin for the Democratic Party. We have to take that fight head on because it has very little to do with that we weren't progressive enough, but a whole lot to do with we didn't message enough, and we didn't message enough about the progressive values that the public agrees with us on. Here are the facts of what happened. If last fall we had talked about unemployment has shrunk for the last 58 or 59 months in a row, we would have resonated with voters. If we would have said that the stock market has nearly doubled from its low point, we would have resonated with voters. If we would have shown the charts that productivity was off the charts, we would have resonated with voters. But what we didn't mention was that wages have been completely flat during that same time. And what that meant is we had to talk to voters about while everyone else seemed to be doing well, all the profits were going to the top 1 or 2% and not being shared with everyone else. Because there was an article in the New York Times talked about a white Southern male, 30 to 55, who used to make $25 to $30 an hour, and now they can make $10 an hour. You can't pay your mortgage, you can't send your kids to college, you can't do any of the things that we expect that a middle-class family should be able to do, and we didn't have that conversation. So there's some who are saying that we need to turn a little more to the center. We have a chance to embrace, for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. glad I got that reaction. Not that I didn't expect that reaction, but I'm glad I got that reaction because I work on that every single day in Congress. You know, there are some who think that if we just open ourselves up to this deal, will open us up to 40% of the world's gross domestic product. It is NAFTA on steroids. It is a huge deal, 29 chapters big. And yet, we don't know exactly what's in it. And we're going to be asking Congress to give up our right to represent you through amending it and debating it through a fast-track proposal that's coming up. But there are Democrats who think that that is a wildly great idea. We have Democrats who are proposing right now, Wall Street is saying they are going to stop making donations to Senate Democrats because of Elizabeth Warren and Tammy Baldwin and Sherrod Brown. And there are folks who want to be a little warmer and friendlier to that party. So we have to make sure that we have got some real serious opportunities coming up because we have a presidential primary coming up. And personally, I think the more that we have a full debate during that primary and not a simple coronation, the better off we will all be. The idea is that we need to get out in the next 24 months. Our ideas about real tax reform. Is it just trying to move to the center and talk about how to lower overall rates, or is it talking about making sure that you have the proper distribution, that those who make the most can also afford the most to give in, and that we have a tax structure that's in place, especially for those who are struggling hard to get into the middle class? Are we going to have a serious plan in place to address climate change, or are we going to keep pushing off the plan that some people are proposing we do? Are we going to stand up for public schools? You know, Wisconsin is epicenter in the middle of a debate with the expanding of taxpayer-funded vouchers. We are having this very debate in Congress. I serve on the Education and Workforce Committee. We just had the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in front of us, and there was a provision called, I'm going to forget what it's called, portability. Portability meant you could take funding that goes with a low-income student directly to whatever school they go to, rather than how we currently do it, is if a school's got 30% kids in poverty, there's a little bump in how much money they get. 50 or 60%, another little bump. Because let's face it, if you're in a district that has a larger number of kids in poverty, you've got more challenges in education. I brought up on the floor of Congress this example of in Milwaukee, Steuben Middle School in the inner city of Milwaukee. I went and visited when I was in the state legislature. Very low-income neighborhood. A couple kids gave us a tour with the principal. Often the kids let out in the morning, and at the end of the day when it's dark is when they come home. The school has them for breakfast, for lunch, for after school, for every bit of that program. While we were in that school, we were in the library, and there were about 30 kids meeting in that library, and I asked what that group was. They said it was a lost group who's lost someone close to them through non-natural methods. In other words, not old age, but drugs, AIDS, or violence. It was one of 4 groups that size in that middle school. That's the real challenge we have in our public schools. And if you take that funding away, and instead those dollars are going to go to a wealthier district, Milwaukee alone would have lost $160 million in the proposal. But worse yet, this is a slippery slope, because once you do that, you can take the money into any school. Doesn't that sound like Scott Walker? Then it can go to any school, including private schools, and then you're going to have a taxpayer-funded program across the country. So we need to stand up more for our public schools in this country. I was listening to our grannies, and you know what? If your agenda was on the congressional agenda, we'd be a lot better off. We need to have a serious debate, not just about upping the minimum wage, but let's talk about a living wage. That's what we need to have a debate about. I'm going to channel Russ Feingold for a second, but Russ was right back then, as much as I hope he'll be right next year for us. You're going to hear from Mike McCabe, but we have to get rid of Citizens United, and we have to have a smarter way of funding our campaigns. One of the things we did, actually two of the things that we did in the Progressive Caucus budget, new this year, this provision, we have found a way that you can have not just combining more and more student debt. In the last 11 years, student debt has quadrupled in this country. There is a way you can have debt-free public universities, and we need to do that in this country. And as I get ready to go down to Kenosha to help my mom pack and think about, well, her increase this past year was, I think, $39 a month in Social Security. We need to quit having these conversations about privatizing and voucherizing and cutting around the edges. We should be expanding Social Security, not cutting it. We need to start having that kind of a debate. So in other words, we need to talk about how we have a growing economy, but from the bottom up and not the top down. And we've got too many challenges, whether it be the Republicans and the Tea Party, or even the challenges within our own party to have that. So I just want to end with saying we've got something very important coming up in just a few, not even weeks now. We're down to about 10 days. We've got an election coming up in April where we'll be deciding on a Supreme Court justice. It's going to be a low turnout primary. Is anyone not going out to vote in April here? I figured I didn't need to say that message to this crowd. But we have to get a lot of other people also out to do that. We're going to have a presidential primary that's not starting. It's started already. That's coming up. But we need to make sure that all these issues we talked about get part of the debate now, because we don't want to have someone starting from the center. We want to have the debate within the Democratic Party about what our nominee is going to stand for, and not waiting for that later. So we have to be on top of that. We also are going to have a very important U.S. Senate race up next year in Wisconsin. It's our opportunity to let Ron Johnson go back to his company and run it, and have someone else hopefully in our U.S. Senate seat. And finally, and important to keep our eye on the prize is, it's not just about 2016, but 2018. I truly believe that everything Scott Walker's been doing is going to put us in a really great place to take back the governorship in 2018. And also, Tammy Baldwin is going to be up for re-election. So what we put in place now can continue until 2018. And what I love about what Nate and you all are about is you don't just wait till there's the next election. You're doing this nonstop throughout to make sure we're always ready for that next election. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me here with you a little bit today. I look forward to working with you throughout now in 16 and 18, and I appreciate so much the work you're all doing. Thank you very much.